I'm Robert Howard from Amateur Music Network. I'll be moderating, so feel free to type in the chat window um, any questions you have, and we'll have plenty of time to address all of those. Welcome back, Scott Pingel. Thank you so much for joining us. You were so generous with your time last week. I know I
Hey,
learned a lot, and we're looking for. I'm just going to turn it over to you, Scott.
hey, thank you. It's wonderful to be back with you. You know, I know it was a lot last week, so I just want to start with a little, just quick review of a few highlights. Um, the first one is just your setup and your posture with your bass. I see a lot of people have their basses in hand, and maybe if you remember, one of the things that we talked about is that if you have your bass at 12 o'clock, then your body is probably at about 10 o'clock so that your sternum is facing about to the far corner of your bridge. So just check out where you're, and if you're a standing player, make sure your sternum and your hips are both facing in that direction. You don't want to have your hips one way and your shoulders another way. You want to feel very neutral and relaxed and comfortable as you play, as natural as possible. And then our posture, if you're a sitting player, you want to make sure you're forward on your stool, that your sits bones are more toward the front. If you put your sits bones toward the back, it'll make you arch and kind of slouch. So you want to have a nice open posture, and then everybody should be able to reach over their instrument and feel like they can reach almost to the bridge with both hands without having to, slouch way down like that. You should be able to feel pretty open and supported and reach pretty far over. Yeah, good. Yep. Seeing people looking pretty comfortable doing that. That's great. Good. And then another thing that we worked on was that little exercise on bowing the curves of and the gestures of our arm. And if you remember, we kind of, I mean, even with your bass, you need to put your bass down, but you can just lean over a little bit and swing your arm in a counterclockwise fashion and feel your body kind of swinging the arm for you. And you can see very quickly how your body gets involved with the use of the arm. And then swing your arm in a clockwise fashion, trying not to hit your bass. Feel that passive motion. Good. And then go into your playing position, first without your bow, and just feel a little bit of that motion, that counterclockwise motion, like this sort of down bow gesture. And feel how your body works with that. You can even pay attention to what your right foot or your left foot. Just pay attention to what your feet are doing as you make these gestures. And then go in the reverse direction. Circular motions. Good. Good. A nice way to just kind of loosen up, limber up a little bit. We did another arm swing one, which was, we won't do that now because you got to put the bases down. Next thing is, if everybody remembers where their balance point is, can everybody hold up their bow at the balance point? Should know your gear well enough that you can find it. It should be about a third of the way out. Yeah, good. Right. And then so holding the bow in the balance point, remember we took our right hand and dipped it in the nice cool pool of water. And then you lift that hand and it's dripping wet, relaxed, and you just drape that on the bow. And it should be nice and rounded and relaxed. You can take it off, shake that out, dip it in the water again, put it up there, and feel like it's just like a wet rag draped over the bow. If you're using a German bow, just kind of wet and relaxed, and just let it rest. Yeah. Good. Shake it out and put it up there. And so you notice how my hand, at no time does it look very deviated from its natural position. So that's how you want it to be when you're playing. You want it to just look like your hand, because the bow is designed to fit the hand, not the other way around. So if you see, you're kind of holding the bow like that or like this or something that's unnatural, it's probably wrong. German bow, if you're kind of, scrunching fingers up or anything that looks unnatural is probably not right. So get things to feel and look as easy and fluid and natural as possible.
Scott, I just have a quick question about pronation.
Yes.
A lot of violinists tend to pronate a lot. Would you say,
Yes.
on a general basis, do less of that?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Yeah. So, violinists are mainly playing like this, so they have to support the bow this way. So they hold like this, and they put their pinky on top, and the pinky helps control that action. Now, basses and cellists, our bow is more held in this plane because we play the instrument vertically, not horizontally. And so we need a little bit more support this way. So we have our pinky kind of hooked around this way. I have seen some cellists and bass players actually do this, but I find that the sound is thinner and you lose some power. So I like that pinky just hooked around like that. And round. And now in terms of pronation, if you see we talked a little bit about this last week, but the position of my elbow has a lot of effect to where the weight transfers in my hand. You can see it in my hand as I do this with my elbow, that weight goes to the pinky side. And as I raise my elbow, the weight will shift to the index finger side. And that's what happens as you draw the bow out. You turn slightly so the elbow raises up and you turn slightly here toward the tip. And then as you come back, the elbow will lower and it flattens that weight out in the hand. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And the same mechanism is true for German bow, that if you need to pronate, like transfer weight to the tip, it's an action of kind of raising the elbow a little bit. You can, a buddy of mine has this exercise where he calls it the 2 fists exercise, where the action of pronation is just this. So it's, yeah. Or I've even some people say, like for French bow, it's like opening a door handle. Mm-hmm. Or German bow, it's like dumping a pitcher of water.
We have a question here. How perpendicular to our arm and hand should the bow be while it's in the hand? From a top-down view.
Yeah, from a top-down view. That's going to change as to where you are on the string. So if you're at the frog, that's a very good question, actually. If you notice the shape of my hand, so here's my shoulder, and my arm goes this way, but notice the hand stays pretty perpendicular to the bow. And I hinge at the wrist. Now as I draw the bow out, that angle is going to change at the wrist. So you see now that is straighter. And then as I come in, that wrist will flex. So really what kind of stays somewhat perpendicular to the bow is really from this kind of the hand and the pinky, for those of us that are French bow players. German bow players, it's a little different animal. It's still similar mechanics. So I'm not sure, I'm assuming it was a French bow player that asked that question.
Let me see. It's Kevin.
Who's Kevin? Yeah.
Kevin.
Kevin, did that answer your question? Yes. Okay, good.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. It's a very good question. All right. And then another thing we got into a little bit last week, and this is going to be important for the Beethoven, is the bowing curves. And mainly the ones that is the forward and the reverse curves are the ones that are going to be particularly interesting for the Beethoven. But if you remember, we start with the bow on the G string, and we would just draw a down bow from the G to the D. And then make a circle. Another circle. And the interesting is when you do that you lead that string crossing to a lower string with the hand. And then you do the reverse. You start on the D string and go up to G, kind of leading with your shoulder. And then you do 3 strings, G, D, A. And then the reverse. You can do 4 strings and so on. And that particular curve pattern is going to be really useful for the Beethoven. You can do number 9, which is all 4 strings right into one another. And if you remember, that one is a forward curve. The whole time the screw on my bow is following a track that mirrors the curve of the bridge. And then if you do the opposite of that, starting with an up bow, you have the reverse curves. Or we'll start with a down bow. So down bow on a lower string to a higher string. Go to an up bow on the G string to the D string. And then do 3 strings. And then 3 strings the opposite direction. You can go to the bottom of the page, number 9, which is just all 4 strings together. I've always liked doing those exercises as a warm-up, because it kind of gets the bass vibrating and it gets my arm just thinking of large, smooth, rounded gestures. And it's kind of fun to just watch the track that the bow takes as I do that reverse curve. It's like makes a smile up this way and then a smile back down this way. So
Scott, we have one more question here.
Yeah.
Sorry, from Dominic. On a down bow, approaching the tip, is extension coming from moving the shoulder
Great.
or extending at the elbow?
That's another excellent question. I didn't want to get too, I guess, I got in a lot of detail last week, but I actually kind of avoided that one a little bit, not to get too complicated. But yeah, so I've heard, lots of different pedagogues that I respect very much give differing opinions on that. In the violin world, you've got this position, when you're at the frog, you've got this sort of triangle, and then you get to the box as your arm comes out. And then you extend, the violinist will extend then through the elbow. But their strings are much smaller and their bow is a lot longer. And so they have to reach a little bit further, but they don't need the large muscle groups kind of to the extent that we do. So I do a little bit, when I get out to the tip, there may be a little bit of opening, but I kind of open my body out a little bit more, because what that does is it keeps me in my back muscles. If I go here and then I stop the upper arm and then extend with this, now I've moved into my smaller muscles in the upper arm. And so, and in German bow, I find that I don't do a lot with opening at the elbow here. I mean, you can, and French bow you certainly can for small strokes. So sometimes you do hinge at the elbow. But for like a lot of big gestures, big movements like that, I like to keep it simple and mainly bowing from the shoulder. So you see there, the angle at my elbow didn't change a whole lot. That's a great question. It's a very observant question, Dominic. Thank you for asking that. So yeah, so I just, again, just to specify, I find this to be weaker, that gesture. But I do occasionally use it, like if I was, if I was doing small strokes out here, yeah, I would be,
I was going to ask,
yeah.
is it correlated to volume at all for you?
Yeah, and it's correlated to volume. It's a matter of how much power you want.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, and then so Jeff writes, it looks like you put your body into it. Yes, that's why I had to start with that gesture of doing this, and so that you would feel how as you draw the bow, how I use my body to change directions. Again, and that's for the really big strokes like that, long strokes. But it's very liberating to your body when you can roll a little bit like that, and you'll find yourself making a more relaxed and open sound. So excellent questions. I'm really happy to see that. And the one thing that we didn't really get to much last week that I wanted to touch on a little bit, which is on page 5 of the technical fundamentals handout, and it's the frame of the hand and the neck positions. And I just want to start out with just the first one, and it's with these patterns, which are all of the fingering patterns in the neck positions. So the first one starts with a fifth, and then a tritone, major third, minor third, major third, tritone, and then fifth. And what that does, it's training you to keep your fingers down. And it trains all the shapes, all the shapes of your hand in the low positions. So we'll do that first one, which is starting with 4 and 1. Rest and slide up a half step and do the next one. And the whole time you're doing it, try to maintain perpendicular plane, keep the bow parallel to the bridge, and try to stay as little amount of pressure as you possibly need with your left hand, just enough to get the strings down. And you're only moving one finger at a time. And so you'll feel a lot of blood flowing in your fingers. If it starts to get a little cramped or tired, stop and shake it out.
I have a question, Scott.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you go directly on top of the string or a little bit to the bass side?
Great question. So see if I can. I can't really get my bass in position there. As your hand is on the string, if sitting here looking, if I look over at my hand, between my fingers, I should be able to see a little bit of the upper part of my palm. If I'm sitting too low, like too much on the pad, then I can't see the upper part of my palm. I can see the base of my fingers. And that means I'll probably be a little too flat, and that means my weight is then too far around this way. So I want to have this up enough that I can see the upper part of my palm, and then I know that I'll be on the right part of my fingers. Now, I don't play on the actual tip of the finger. I play slightly back from that, and I don't play flat-fingered either. Some people do that, and they find good results with that. I personally don't like that. I've never felt that to be very comfortable. So my fingers are just slightly rounded, and as I turn and look, I can just see just the top of my palm. And if I go like this, then I can't see it anymore.
And does that change for you as you go into thumb position, or is it mostly the same?
Oh, of course, yeah. So as you go up into thumb position, obviously your elbow has to come up, and then it's going to send you more onto the tip of the fingers. And so we're going to cover that in the second half of the class a little bit today. But yeah, as you go up, then you come a little bit more on the tips. One way to kind of try, since the question came up, is for thumb position. If you just hold your hand like this, like you're holding a tennis ball, and then now you just flip it over and stick it on your thumb on the G harmonic, and with your fourth finger just barely off, that's about your hand position. So that like you're cupping a ball or cupping some water, and you flip over, and then you'll have that roundedness in your fingers. And notice how my hand stays together. I don't have anything splayed out at this point. Right now, this is just my sort of home-based position. All my fingers are a half step apart. And notice my pinky is hanging out next to my third finger. If my pinky goes out, now I've introduced tension into an activation in my hand, and that could potentially fight the rest of my hand. So I like my hand to feel neutral and relaxed and supportive. And even if I have to open my hand to wider frames, my pinky generally stays pretty close to my third finger. And as I do that, my base knuckles drop in. So I was going to cover that in the second half of this class today, but since you brought it up. So a good way to practice this is put your hand down there. Your thumb should be on G, and your third finger should be about B flat. And then just start to open your hand wider and wider. So open third finger to B, and then to C, and C sharp, but keep your thumb where it is, and stretch to D. And see how your knuckles kind of drop down. If you try to keep your knuckles up, it's impossible to reach. So my knuckles will drop in as my frame widens. And then as they come back, those base knuckles come up. And so that action is that opening the hand, kind of like a fan, is very important for a thumb position. Yeah. Yeah, and check your pinky. See that you lead with your third finger and not the pinky. You want the pinky to be pretty passive, kind of hanging out with your third finger. I always think of the pinky as a supportive finger to my third finger. And also check that your wrist is pretty straight. So I see some people kind of extra curved, or sometimes their elbow is too high. Kind of like we did with dipping the hand in the water, and your hand should be pretty loose. And as you put it down, the wrist should be neutral. So if your elbow is too high, you'll get a bend in the wrist. If you don't want, sometimes we'll play like this, but most of the time, try to keep your wrist just pretty neutral and straight. And that will give you the best results and most efficient interaction in the upper register. Great. Yeah. Seeing people fixing stuff beautifully. Very, very nice. All right. Since we're on it, let's just do this right now. If you turn to, in the technical fundamentals, it's page 14. I hope you have the version that I sent out that had the page numbers on it, because the first one I sent had no page numbers. I realized that would be very frustrating. So it's called The Frames of the Hand with the Thumb. And I mentioned a very useful resource in that, for those of you that may not be familiar with this book. It's called Simplified Higher Technique by Franco Petracchi. I highly recommend this book. It's great training for using the thumb. There's also the Rabath books, but that's even a lot more to chew. It's very expansive, and they're very expensive books. But I think the Petracchi book does just as good of a job in many ways of introducing and formalizing and creating a method for learning thumb position technique. And so you'll see in that first section, there's the frames of the hand, and this is I take right out of Petracchi's book. He has these three hand shapes, which is chromatic, which is what we already covered, which is a half step between each finger. So if I were to play that, That's the chromatic hand shape. And then I open my hand between thumb and 1, but I keep my other fingers the same distance. And now I have the semi-chromatic. So now there's a whole step between thumb and 1. So give that a try if you all have that. So first do the chromatic, which is a half step between every finger, and just check that your hand position is very relaxed and curved. We'll just do separate bows for now. And the next one is semi-chromatic. And now the last one is he calls the diatonic. And so my thumb and first finger stay exactly where they are. And I open between 1 and 2 to a whole step and keep the half step between 2 and 3. So the distance now is a whole step between thumb and 1, a whole step between 1 and 2, and a half step between 2 and 3.
Scott, sorry to interrupt. We have a question from Joe about your fingers are curved, all of them?
Yes.
Or flat, all curved. He wants to know, is your third finger flat or curved?
Third finger flat or curved. Okay, good question. Third finger I usually keep it slightly curved or maybe straight, but I try to avoid buckling my fingers for a couple of reasons. One, this I can show here. So third finger, if you go to close the string and I'll just use this finger, and your finger buckles, that slows you down because it takes this time to go from here to here to fully trap the string. And then when you want to release the string, it takes longer to get off. So if you keep a little curve in your fingers, you're faster on and off. It's sort of like a hammer on a piano or something. So that's why I don't like buckling the fingers, because it's actually slower. And the other thing that happens is sometimes the pitch will go flat because you think you're putting your finger on this spot, but when you do that, it rolls back and then it might flatten your pitch a little bit. So I try to keep my fingers pretty straight to rounded. But that's a good question, because as the hand opens up, third finger might want to buckle. And so that takes practice to build up that strength to keep it either straight or slightly curved. So earlier in the technical fundamentals handout, I have those trills. So doing these different trills between the different fingers. That's like on I think the third page or fourth page or something of the, it's for the left hand articulation exercises. But doing this, these are really good. And if you get the Petrocchi book, you'll have lots of exercises for so doing these exercises. And also, as you do it, the weight in your hand will roll through the wrists to which finger you need that weight. You know, I talk a lot about with the use of the arm weight to trap the string. It's not necessarily a finger action, but it's the weight of the arm rolling into the finger is what will help you trap the string and stay relaxed.
Scott, you had mentioned in discussing the bow arm, kind of the door handle and all of that. Do you ever feel any similar properties of that arm?
Yeah, absolutely. So even in it's a much more subtle, like right here. But yes, there's a rolling as you do these exercises that I have. There's a slight forward motion as the arm rolls forward into that finger and then back. So whichever finger I need. I don't know if you can see that on the camera because it's so subtle. But there's a little bit of an action of rolling the weight of the arm into the finger that you need. Let's see. Now, at the bottom of that page, or in the middle of that page, I introduced some other hand shapes that are a little bit more advanced, which you guys can explore on your own. Petrocchi does those in his book as well. And then on the bottom of the page, I get into some stuff that's more from Francois Raboth and not part of Petrocchi's training, but it's the exercise at the bottom of the page opens up the possibilities to other less common uses of the frame of the hand, which ultimately would be, we don't use it a lot except for maybe more advanced solo repertoire. But again, I strongly recommend for everybody the Simplified Higher Technique by Franco Petrocchi. I think you'll find it really very instructive, very useful. Good. So in the interest of time, let's jump over to the bow stroke stuff, the bowing skills. And then I'll get to, oh, Chris Bechtel. Hey, look at you in my class, you sneaky. Oh yeah. So he's asking about the role of the elbow in faster passages where volume is needed. Yeah, we'll get into that. I hope, but yeah, I don't mean to say that I never use my elbow. What I was talking about before was as you draw the bow. I don't usually finish the stroke with just the elbow. But I mentioned before. So like here, there's a little bit of fluidity in my elbow, but my upper arm is never locked. My upper arm is always free to move, even if I'm hinging at the elbow. If you tried to do that stroke with a frozen upper arm, what would happen is you'd do this. You need that upper arm to help keep the track of the bow going. So yeah, it has to be fluid. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, first movement of Bottesini Concerto. Yeah. When you do the I might be doing just very small motions with the upper arm. Here's kind of an interesting thing so if I do this with my arm, what part of my arm is moving the fastest? Obviously, it's my hand. And so my hand takes that long to travel from one end of its range of motion to the other, whereas the upper arm is moving a lot slower. And so sometimes even when you're doing fast strokes, your upper arm will still be moving. It just be moving like this much, just very, very small motions. So I try to avoid ever having my upper arm locked. The upper arm needs to be free. If your shoulder is locked, it's very hard to do any kind of bow stroke, even wrist strokes. You can't lock. You have your arm like totally rigid. Like here, I'm doing a sautier. My upper arm is still active. It's still moving around. So I hope that answers your question. All right, so let's go to the bowing skills. Number one is, it looks pretty simple, but it's actually, it's such an important component of practicing with the bow. The first one is just, and we'll use just like we'll use a 1-octave C major scale for all of these. You could do these on open strings. You can do them on arpeggios, on scales, on etudes. There's many, and I give some resources there for some books that I recommend. One of them it's very extensive, but it's called The Essentials of Sevchek by Neil Tarleton. And it has a more than a lifetime, probably about 2 lifetimes worth of bowing variations with these etudes. And but
is that the 40 variations for violin?
No, that one is a later one.
Okay.
It's his Opus 2, so it's his earlier one, the one that has like.
Oh, it has like 1,000,001.
It's like 1,000,001 variations, yeah. And so this guy Neil, he's a friend of mine. He was the principal bass of the Philharmonia of London, and he took the Sevchek book and kind of trimmed the fat, and kind of took out some of the variations that are not necessary for bass players, really. But it's still a lot. Like I think Etude number 5 has something like 300 bowing variations. I mean, it's just like, it's insane. I mean, forever. It can get a little tedious, but anyway. So I put down like 69 or 70 bowing skills. It's sort of as a bird's eye view of what's covered in some of the Sevchek. And so this first one is a couple of things. One, you see I write keep the bow 90 degrees to the string. And that's one of the things you want to work on with this particular one. And so the first thing you'll do is start with full bows. Two, lift, and make a big circle and set. Just start with just the C's. And feel that, a little bit of that gesture that we did before, that we started with, that circular motion. And then do it with an up bow, and see if you can keep your bow perpendicular to the string or parallel to the bridge, even on the lift. 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. And one of the tricks with this one, what's trickier about the up bow one, is not getting a skitter or a jumping in your bow when you set it at the tip. Is really try to control the landing of the tip as you come through and you land. Try to set it carefully on the string without it jumping. And the whole time try to stay 90 degrees to the string, but still make a circular motion in the vertical plane. And use your body as you do it. 3, 4. 3, 4. Yeah, and then another thing you want to listen for is the resonance. If you pluck the note with your left hand, or just the C with your right hand, and you hear the sound of the string ringing, that vibration in the string, that free, uninhibited vibration of the string is what we're trying to make happen with the bow. So very open, resonant tone. So as you release the note, you should hear it ringing. Yeah, some people like to say that average players think about the beginning of notes and maybe the middle of the notes, but the great players think about the beginning, the middle, and the end of the note. The follow through. What does it sound like after your bow is finished playing that note? So listen to the profile of the whole thing. Now the second one is doing the same action but with half bows. And what's tricky about this is that's the place where the bow is the most sort of active. So you're going to start down bows right in the middle. So start with C. Try to match the sound. And then do the reverse. Start up bows from the middle. Yeah. Good. Excellent. And try to keep that 90 degrees to the string the whole time and control the landing and try to make the beginning, middle, and end of each of the notes sound similar. And then number 2 is similar, except you're just going to pause the bow and then go back the way you came. So, and it's a little bit faster bow speed. It's a quarter note full bow. 2. I write in this one, listen to the beginning, middle, and end of each note, and begin each note with a vowel sound that is sustained and slightly tapered into the rests for a musical resonant release. And so what I mean by that is if you start and you get kind of a with a hard consonants, it means you've put too much pressure in the front. If you get, you've put too much pressure. You just want a vowel start. And then a little bit of a taper into the rest. If you don't have that taper, if you stop the bow with pressure, you'll get a choked sound at the end of the note. I don't know if you can hear it, but it'll be... You hear that kind of at the end of the note. So that's that lightening of the pressure at the end of the note, so it has a nice rounded finish. Good. And then number 3 is détaché. And I kind of like to use these terms for my students. There's a lot of misinformation in the bass world anyway. Pedagogy in the bass world is not quite where it is in the violin world, but détaché just is simply fully connected, non-articulated strokes and the even tone throughout. So you just play and just fully connect one note right into the next one. One thing you want to listen for as you do that is constant spinning of the string. You want the string just freely spinning the whole time you're doing it, and the room should just be ringing. You don't want any disruption between the two notes. So you hear it there, I choked and I stopped the bow. I want that string to be constantly spinning as I change directions. This is a great one for feeling that body motion to move the bow, and that will really help smooth those changes between. So like if you watch, so you see that the rocking motion of my body really helps connect those notes. All right. The next one I want to go to is what's called accented détaché. Now we're going to start changing pressure, and we're going to put a little bit of pressure at the front of each stroke, and that will give an accent. So you get, but you fully connect them. So that's the accented détaché, and it's important to be able to control all of these things. I really like number 8 because that one it works on matching the sound in both ends of the bow and also the middle of the bow. So you get.
I just have a question for you, Scott.
Yeah.
If I were doing that on the cello, I would use more index finger in the upper half than in the lower half.
That's a great, yes, thank you for saying that. I'm so glad that you're here. Yes, so as we were talking about pronation before, when you get out to the tip, you're going to feel more of that first finger. Remember, like for French bow players, it's like opening a handle on a door. For German bow players, it's like dumping water out of a pitcher. And as you get out here, you have to turn that weight into the first finger to grip the string to get that bite. Yeah. And so, and it's on the plane that I'm drawing on. If I lift too much, then I'll switch strings. So you want to keep the plane, and you go into the plane. I'm talking about the bowing plane for each string. But that's a great point. Did that answer your question, Robert?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, great. So that's accented détaché stroke, which is very, very useful stroke. And then the next one, number 9, is staccato, which is just a very light stroke, or it can be heavy, but there's just space between the notes. And this can be played in any part of the bow. If you notice, I have the M with a star next to it. I borrow that from Sevchek, and what he means by that is frog, middle, and tip. So you should practice this in the middle also. And then also at the tip, the last third or so of the bow. So you should be able to match the sound in every part of the bow. That shows full control of your use of the bow. This is an important stroke. The next one I'm going to talk about is number 11, which is called the martelet. My teacher taught me that martelet was a heavy hammered spiccato because martelet translates as hammered. And I remember I was in a rehearsal with a violinist, and I said, "Hey, let's use martelet there." And I demonstrated what I wanted. He's like, "That's not martelet. That's like spiccato. What are you talking about?" And I said, "Isn't martelet meaning like a heavy spiccato because it means hammered?" And he's like, "No, you need to go check your pedagogy." So anyway, so martelet is actually an on the string stroke that is sort of a cross between the accented détaché and the staccato. So it has a bite on the front and then a little space after the note. So that's about what I just did there. Was approximately number 11. It's very context specific. But you can hear there's a bite on the front and then a space between the notes. And this stroke is useful for things like those of you that know Beethoven or Brahms Symphony Number 2. When you have in the first movement, there's this. Right here. That's a stroke where I'm starting from the string and releasing each note, but each note is from the string. Those eighth notes are all martelet. So when you play that's a use of martelet. All right, another good thing to practice is number 13, which is uneven bow speeds and learning how to control the sound in an uneven bow speed. So number 13 is full bow for each note. Oh, that should be a D. Oops. So you notice it's a little bit louder on that up bow. And so the way to help mitigate that is to slightly lighten the pressure as you make that move with that faster bow speed. And the tone will be a little bit different, but it helps minimize the drastic change in sound. All right, so I want to jump ahead because it's already 7:50. There's a lot of these bow strokes we're not going to get to. I want to jump to number 28, I believe it is, the slurred or hooked staccato. This is a really good stroke for practicing your bow distribution and weight distribution throughout the bow. So number 28 should sound like. So as I do that, you want use about a quarter bow per note, and you should be able to make an equivalent sound in each part of the bow. It's a very, very useful bowing practice. And
Scott,
then, yeah,
sorry to interrupt again. When you do that, are you squeezing at all with your thumb or index anymore?
a little bit, yes, yeah, good point. So yeah, it's I write in there, I think I write in there that it's similar to some martelets in the same direction. I hope I wrote that in there. Or staccato strokes in the same direction. So yeah, so you just slightly bite the string at the start of each note. Does that make sense? So. So there's just a little bit of a just pressure between the index finger and thumb. For German bow, would be thumb and palm. Yeah, get a little bit of bite on each of those. And then you go to number 29, and you use about an eighth of bow per note. And if you want to get crazy with it, you can start using 12, 16, even up to like 32 notes in a bow. That's 16. And what I like to do after I've done a bunch of those is then just go to I'm always amazed at how much more relaxed my hand feels after doing that. So it's a really good bowing skill. The next one I want to go to is the number 38, which is using portato to study dynamics. I explained what portato is just above it, which is essentially it's sort of like staccato but with a wah-wah sound. So I never stop the bow. I'm only just slowing it and reducing its pressure in between the notes. So you're still dividing the bow, but you're just altering the speed and pressure, but never stopping it. And so you can use that to study dynamics. And so number 38, you'll use bow speed. So the louder it is, the more bow speed you'll have. So it'll sound something like. Give that one a try if you didn't. So you use about a 16th of the bow or eighth of the bow for the pianissimo, and then by the time you get to the forte, it's a half of your bow. Yeah, it's so weird. I can't hear anybody, but I see you all doing it. Good. So it's an exercise in controlling your bow speed. And then you can go to the next one, number 39, and now just smooth that out without any sort of pulsing, and you can practice dynamics this way. And that first dynamic variation is one of the most important to do, is being able to comfortably crescendo to the tip and diminuendo to the frog, because it's contrary to what feels comfortable. So it's very, very useful technique. And then you can apply what you just learned then to number 40, which is a forte piano, which is not an accent, it's a dynamic effect. And so that you would use probably about a half a bow for the forte, and then less, or at least half a bow for the forte, and then much slower bow speed for the rest. So it's about a quarter note of forte. One, two, three, four. It's a good way to really get your know exactly what you're doing with those. All right. So I want to go to number 48, which is the brush stroke. This is a stroke that we do in the lower quarter of the bow. And it's an off the string stroke. So it starts off the string and then grazes the string in a U shape and comes off of it. So I'm like, if my first finger, as you see in the picture there, is the string, I'm doing this sort of shallow U-shaped pattern. And you can get faster with it or slower, but that's the brush stroke. And the brush stroke is easiest done in the low part of the bow, where that release and that interaction with the string is easily controlled. If you try to do brush stroke in the middle, it'll start to jump, and it's almost can't do it out here because the stick is just too jumpy out there. So whether it's German or French bow, brush stroke you want to do near the frog. And so try that. Really close to the frog. Yeah. Any questions on that brush stroke? Looks like people are getting it pretty well. Think of that shallow U-shaped. If you want it to have more bite, you go more sort of vertical, more like a V. Yeah. And it's a slightly different stroke than spiccato, which we'll get to in a little bit. All right, so I want to get to the hybrid stroke, which is number 49, which is very similar to that, except now the hair won't fully leave the string. So if you're playing with a just slight tilt of the hair, you're doing this U shape, but the hair doesn't really leave the string. And this is important for some fast strokes where you need separation, but you don't have time to leave the string. But as you can see, I'm still using my whole arm as I do that stroke.
Scott, do you adjust the length of bow depending on the register that you're in?
Yes, great question. Yes, so as you go higher and the string gets thinner and shorter, you have to play the stroke longer. As you go lower, where the string is fatter and longer, you have to play the stroke shorter. So in these low positions, my amount of bow use is probably that much. And then if I'm playing up on the transition area, my bow stroke might be twice as long to get the same sound. If I play the same length, you'll get, you hear it got really short and kind of picky. So as you shorten the string length, yes, great question, Robert. You got to play the stroke a little longer. Excellent, excellent question. So for the two more strokes that I want to cover before we go, One of them is called the scoop stroke, and this is going to be important for Beethoven, where we have these sforzati. And when you do a scoop stroke, you kind of scoop into the string as you draw it. And it has some similarity to the brush stroke in that you start with a little bit less pressure and then you sink into the string. That's number 50. And it's that rounded motion. And then number 51 is an important stroke. This is where the Beethoven is gonna affect the Beethoven, is doing this. So notice a little different than the accented détaché. It has a little bit of that hybrid brush start where you kind of sink into it as you pull. You get this wah. And that's what, as I write there, sforzano is a contraction of two words in Italian, which means subito and forzando, which means together suddenly with force, essentially. So you just suddenly force the speed of the bow and then slow it down. And that's going to be important for Beethoven when we get to that. All right. So now we're going to get into a true bounced spiccato, and we're going to do it with ricochet. So I want everybody to take their bow and just drop it right about where the balance point is, and just let it just dribble a few times. You let it 3, 4, or 5 times. Yeah. And now do it about where you stopped with an up bow. So let's just start with 4. And your first finger, French bow players, should be actually pretty passive. You want the stick to be doing most of the work for you. You just drop it and let it bounce. German bow players, your thumb needs to be pretty passive. If your thumb is overly engaged, it'll prevent the stick from bouncing. So you want your thumb to be passive, and in both cases, your elbow should be lower, because if you lift your elbow, it's going to hold the stick down. So you want the elbow down to so let the bow can fly out. So doing like 4 hits in each direction. Good. Now let's do the same thing with 3 strokes. Now with 2 strokes. Now try it 2 strokes right into one another. Good, and so you should feel that stick doing most of the work for you. And now go straight into single strokes. Good. And so you should be bouncing somewhere between the balance point and the middle, probably closer to the balance point is about the ideal spot. As spiccato gets faster, you have to go a little further out, where the stick will move a little faster for you. So let's try that again. Same thing, but a little bit faster speed. About. Excellent.
Scott,
Yeah.
how conscious of you are you of your ceiling or how high you're coming off the string? Does that factor in for you at
Yes.
all?
If you're bouncing excessively high, you're going to probably lose control. So the faster it goes, the lower your bounce will be too, because you just don't have time to bounce very far. So also the higher the bounce, the more vertical and the drier the sound will get. If I bounce a little lower, it's a little bit rounder, a little longer. That's a little drier, a little more vertical.
And does that also change with which string on the E string? Is it a lower?
Yes. Yeah, the E string, it's going to be a shorter stroke and lower bounce because you just can't. The string moves slower. And also, I'm using flat hair. On spiccato, you want to use flat hair. Unless you want a rounder sound, then you tilt the hair a little bit, and then you'll get less articulation and a slower release. It's a rounder tone. So
is your first finger? We have a question from Joe. Is your first finger guiding the bouncing at all?
That's a great question. So I would say what the first finger does is, so after the bow springs off, the first finger helps redirect it back, and then it gets out of the way. That's a great question. So yeah, but my first finger feels pretty supple. A lot of it is the weight of the bow should be enough. Because again, like as I was saying, if you press in with the first finger, you may not be able to, the bow may not spring up. But yes, so if you need more pressure, yes, that first finger is going to engage as you drop and then redirect the bow after the down bow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. All right, well, it's already 10 after 8. And in a little bit, I have a meeting with the San Francisco Symphony. We have an orchestra meeting tonight. But are there any questions?
We'll be back next week for Beethoven 5.
Yeah, next week we'll be back for Beethoven. So take a look at the scherzo and the trio. I have it fully bowed and fingered there. Don't worry, about trying to play it fast or anything. And don't worry, nobody can hear you anyway, so it's not a problem. So, but what I want you to pay attention to as you practice Beethoven 5 is think about, in the scherzo, the curves of the bow. And notice I start at the tip. And when you play this, see how little bow you can use. Try to stay out at the tip. Use about a third of the bow for that whole first passage. And notice the curve that your bow takes around the bridge as you do that. Like we talked about. And then same thing. There's that scoop stroke, right? A little sting. And then here's that stroke that we started with. You're feeling that round motion as you do those. Yeah. It'll draw the... There's where my body is going to come in. Scoop stroke. so on and so forth. So notice how very little bow I used for all of that, staying out at the tip.
Impressive.
And then when you get to the trio, depending on how fast we do it, we'll probably think of it. We'll just pretend it's the hybrid brush stroke. I like this to be somewhere around 80. Dotted half equals 80. So how to practice that is do 3 strokes per note on the trio. That'll allow your left hand to go slowly while your right hand goes at speed. So you go. Now these are martelets. All right. So that's how I recommend practicing that.
Scott, thank you so much for all your time.
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
I'm in awe of how methodical you are.
Oh, well, it's taken a lot of thought. I used to never be this way. I was not taught this way either. I mean, I was, for better or worse, you know, from a lot of my teachers were like, they would demonstrate it and I'd be like, okay, so what do you do with your arm there? Like, I don't know. I just kind of do it this way. Go figure it out. So, I probably would have saved me some time, but anyway, I hope that it's helpful.
And just for anybody watching that hasn't already seen the current video, I think from last week, highly recommended. It's on the Symphony website, right? Is that right?
Yep, Symphony website. And then they did a podcast interview. There's another one that I did with Daniel Bartholomew Poisner, who's conductor from Canada, and we talked about jazz and various things. And then also we had a food critic for the Chronicle, Soleil Ho, and so she and I got into a fun dialogue and talking about food and music. It was really, really fun. So I recommend it. And then she put out a challenge for people to make recipes, which I have to do. And then you're supposed to take pictures of it and post it on Instagram or some sort of social media. So, but I'm terrible about social media. I'm awful about it. I just cannot get into it. So I just I've tried. I just can't get into it. All right. So I hope you guys are getting something good out of it, and hopefully it's helping you, just giving you food for thought.
This has been great. Thank you so much. Anybody that has any questions in the meantime, feel free to email us at Amateur Music Network. We'll be back next week for Beethoven 5. Scott, thank you once again.
All right. Thank you, guys. Great to see everyone.